I chose the spot on purpose. A corner booth at the back of a small coffee shop in Midtown, the kind of place where no one looks up from their laptop long enough to notice you're falling apart. I'd been sitting there for 20 minutes before my coffee even arrived, staring at the sugar dispenser like it owed me an explanation. 3 weeks earlier, I had been a wife. Now I was a woman in a wool coat at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, pretending to read a menu I'd already memorized, trying to remember what my own life felt like before everything I thought I knew turned out to be a lie. My name is Elise. I was 31 years old. I had a good job as a project coordinator at an architecture firm in Manhattan, and had been married to my husband for 4 years. We had a one-bedroom apartment in Astoria. We had a joint checking account. We had a standing Friday night reservation at the Thai place on Ditmars that always seated us at the same table by the window. We had, I thought, a life. What I did not know, what I had absolutely no idea about until a Wednesday afternoon when I came home early with a migraine and found her blazer draped over our kitchen chair, was that my husband had been having an affair for almost 2 years. Her name was Vanessa. She worked at his office. She was 34, divorced, and apparently had no problem leaving her coat in another woman's apartment, like she owned the square footage. My husband's name was Brandon, and when I stood in that kitchen holding a stranger's blazer, Brandon walked out of the bedroom and looked at me the way you look at a problem you were hoping would solve itself. He didn't apologize. Not that night. Not in the weeks that followed. What he did instead was get very busy, with lawyers, with logistics, with quietly moving a significant amount of money out of our joint account before I even thought to check. I found out about the money the same way I found out about Vanessa. By accident. By showing up somewhere I wasn't expected. I had gone to our bank to ask about refinancing options for a small business loan I was thinking about applying for. The woman behind the desk pulled up our account. Then she looked at her screen. Then she looked at me. Then back at her screen. "Mrs. Elise," she said carefully, "are you aware of the recent wire transfers from this account?" I was not. $43,000. Gone in 4 separate transfers over 6 weeks. All of it sent to an account I didn't recognize under a name I'd never heard, a name that turned out, when I later had an attorney run a search, to belong to Vanessa's brother. Brandon hadn't just cheated on me. He had been quietly funneling our savings into her family's orbit while I was at work, planning our hypothetical future, and cooking dinner every Sunday night like nothing was wrong. The migraine I'd come home with that Wednesday was nothing compared to what hit me when I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and did the math. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I had already done my crying, alone, in the bathroom of our apartment the night I asked him to leave. That crying was the private, ugly kind. The kind that leaves you wrung out and hollow. What I felt in that parking lot was something different. Something quieter and considerably more dangerous. I called my attorney. I called my sister. And then I sat there for a long time, watching strangers walk into the bank with their ordinary problems, and I thought, okay, what now? I did not expect anyone to come to me. That is not a thing you anticipate. You anticipate the court dates and the asset disclosure forms and the awkward silences at mutual friends' dinner parties. You do not anticipate that a stranger will call your direct work line on a Thursday morning, introduce himself in a voice that sounds like someone who is also exhausted, and say, "I think we need to meet." His name was Conrad. He was Vanessa's husband, ex-husband, technically. They had been separated for 8 months, which overlapped almost entirely with the period during which my own husband had been sleeping with her. I almost hung up. "I know how this sounds," he said before I could. "I don't think you do," I said. "You found out about the money." That stopped me. "How do you know about the money?" I asked. "Because," he said, "it's not just your money." We met at a diner in Chelsea. Neutral territory. Neither of our neighborhoods, neither of our offices. I got there first and took a table near the window because I wanted to be able to see him coming. I don't know what I expected. Someone angry, maybe. Someone who wanted to yell or to cry or to make me feel responsible for something that had nothing to do with me. Conrad was none of those things. He was 40 years old, an engineer, and he looked like someone who had not slept properly in several months. He sat down across from me, ordered black coffee, and placed a manila folder on the table between us before he said a word. My attorney found it first, he said. I thought it was just the separation, the account shuffling that happens when a marriage falls apart. But the pattern was wrong, too deliberate, too coordinated. He opened the folder. What I was looking at were financial records, wire transfers, account numbers, dates. Some of the transfers I recognized immediately. They were the same ones my bank teller had flagged. But there were others. Transfers from Conrad's accounts too. Different destinations, same general direction, into a network of accounts that, when you traced them far enough, all led back to the same LLC. A company registered in Delaware. A company I had never heard of. A company that had been incorporated, according to the documents in front of me, 14 months ago, right around the time Brandon started working late. What is this? I asked. My attorney thinks it's a startup, Conrad said, using our money. He paused. Both of our money. I went home that night and I sat on my kitchen floor for a while. Not because I couldn't function. I could function. I was doing it. I was making the coffee and filing the paperwork and showing up to work every morning. I sat on the floor because sometimes a floor is the most honest surface available. You can't pretend you're fine when you're sitting on linoleum at 9:30 p.m. eating crackers out of the box. What I kept thinking about was not the money exactly, it was the timeline. Brandon and I had gotten married when I was 27. We had talked in those early years about saving up for a down payment, for a business, for the abstract future that young couples construct together out of optimism and spreadsheets. I had been careful. I had been disciplined. I had contributed to that account every single month, had turned down trips I wanted to take and furniture I wanted to buy, because I believed we were building something. And while I was doing that, while I was carefully, faithfully building, he had been doing math of his own. The LLC was called Veritas Solutions Group. It had a website that was mostly placeholder text and a mission statement about innovative consulting frameworks. It had 3 listed employees. One of them was Vanessa's brother Darren, who I now knew had received our money. One of them was a woman named Portia, who turned out to be Darren's girlfriend. And the third was Brandon. My husband had used our savings to fund himself a job, a fake company, real money, and a plan that was only going to become visible when he was far enough away that it didn't matter. Conrad's attorney believed the intent was for both of them, Brandon and Vanessa, to exit their respective marriages, liquidate what they could, and relocate. There was a lease inquiry his attorney had found for an apartment in Austin. He had been planning to go to Austin. I had never even known he liked Austin. Conrad and I met 4 more times over the following 3 weeks. The diner in Chelsea, a conference room at my attorney's office, a park bench in Riverside Park once, because it was the only place I could think clearly, and one afternoon at a coffee shop near the courthouse where both of our filings were being processed. I want to be honest about what those meetings were and what they were not. They were not romantic. They were not the beginning of anything. They were 2 people sitting across from each other with folders and legal pads, trying to figure out how to undo damage that someone else had done to both of their lives. There was something both isolating and relieving about that, to be in the presence of someone who understood not just that you'd been betrayed, but specifically how, specifically by whom, specifically in what sequence of calculated steps. Conrad was methodical. He had a way of laying out a problem on the table, like a map, turning it so both of you could see it from the same angle. I found this useful. I had been trying to see the situation clearly for weeks, but grief makes the edges blurry. He had grief too. I could see it, but he kept it in a separate room while we worked. What we were building, with the help of 2 attorneys and a forensic accountant Conrad hired, was a case. The transfers had not been authorized. Not by me. Not by Conrad. Brandon had been the primary account holder, which meant he had access, but several of the transfers exceeded the threshold that required joint authorization under our account agreement. He had forged my signature on at least 2 wire authorization forms. That was not just a divorce matter. That was wire fraud. That was bank fraud. That was, as my attorney said one afternoon with the calm precision of someone who had been doing this for 20 years, a federal problem. I remember the morning the investigators came to Brandon's office. I was at work when Conrad texted me, 3 words. It's happening now. I put my phone face down on my desk. I looked at my monitor. I had a deck to finish for a client presentation at 2 o'clock, and I finished it, because the only way I know how to stay sane is to keep doing the next thing in front of me. But my hands were shaking slightly the whole time, and my colleague Fern asked if I wanted tea, and I said yes please, and I drank it looking out the window at the building across the street and thinking about a kitchen chair with a stranger's blazer on it. The investigators seized Brandon's work computer and his files. They contacted the bank. They filed a hold on the LLC accounts, which still had money in them, including, it would turn out, a substantial portion of what had been transferred. Darren was questioned. His girlfriend Portia was questioned. Vanessa was questioned, though her attorney maintained she had no direct knowledge of the financial mechanics, only that Brandon had told her he was handling things. Whether that defense would hold was not my problem to solve. Brandon was charged with 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of bank fraud. He was released on his own recognizance, pending trial. He did not go to Austin. The money took time. That is the thing no one tells you. That justice, when it actually arrives slowly in installments, with paperwork. The forensic accountant traced $38,000 back to accounts that could be frozen and eventually returned. The remaining $5,000 had been spent on what I still don't entirely know, and at some point I made the decision to stop needing to know. My attorney negotiated a civil settlement alongside the criminal proceedings. It was not everything I had lost. There was enough. Conrad and I signed the last of the joint filings on a Friday afternoon. We shook hands in the elevator lobby of the courthouse. It was a strange moment, the kind of moment that doesn't have a name, where something significant is ending, but it was never yours to begin with. Thank you, I said, because I meant it. You did the hard part, he said. You were the one who could have walked away from it. I hadn't thought about that, but it was true. When he first called, I could have hung up. When he put that folder on the table, I could have pushed it back. There were a dozen points at which I could have decided that untangling this was too much, too complicated, too painful, and settled for whatever Brandon's attorneys offered me just to make it stop. I didn't, though. And it mattered that I didn't. People ask me sometimes, friends, my sister, a therapist I started seeing last spring, whether I'm angry. The honest answer is that I was angry, and then I was sad, and then I was tired. And then somewhere on the other side of tired, there was something that felt unexpectedly, a little like clarity. What Brandon did was not a reflection of me. That sounds simple, but it took me a long time to actually believe it. I had spent months reviewing everything, every conversation, every evening, every Sunday dinner, looking for the thing I had missed, the version of the story where I should have known. But that's not how it works. People who deceive you, that deliberately are not failing to hide it from you. They are succeeding. The success is the point. You didn't miss anything. They covered it. There is a difference between being naive and being trusting. I was trusting. I was also careful and honest and financially disciplined in ways that ultimately meant there was something worth recovering when the recovery became possible. I am not going to apologize for the ways I was good at being a wife. Those were real. They were just given to someone who didn't deserve them. Conrad and I kept in touch, the way you do when you've been through something significant with someone. Occasional texts, a coffee here and there. There was nothing dramatic about it, no sudden revelation, no moment where something shifted. What shifted eventually was just time. We had both rebuilt some version of normal. We had both, in our own separate ways, gotten our feet back under us. He asked me to dinner in January of last year. Not a meeting, not a coffee. Dinner. And I said yes. Partly because I was curious, and partly because he had become someone I trusted, which is not a small thing to be able to say about someone new. It was a good dinner. We talked about things that had nothing to do with Brandon or Vanessa or LLC filings. About his work, about a road trip I'd taken to Vermont in the fall, about whether New York was actually a good place to spend a whole life, or just felt that way when you were in the middle of it. I am careful not to make this part of the story sound like a neat conclusion, because life doesn't give you neat conclusions. What I can say is that we are still having dinners, that I am still living in New York, a different apartment, a different borough, one I chose entirely for myself, that I have a savings account in my own name that no one else can access, that I went back to that coffee shop in Midtown recently, The one where I used to sit in the corner booth and stare at the sugar dispenser and wonder what came next. I ordered my coffee. I took a table by the window this time, not the back corner. I had somewhere to be later. That was enough. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to not fall apart when the floor gives out. Not the dramatic version of holding it together. Not the movie version where someone squares their jaw and delivers a speech. I mean the real version. The version where you sit on your kitchen linoleum at 9:30 at night eating crackers out of the box and you still manage to call your attorney in the morning. That kind of not falling apart. The unglamorous, repetitive, one foot in front of the other kind. Brandon made a calculation. I think that's what I keep coming back to. He didn't act out of passion or confusion. He planned. He opened accounts, forged signatures, built a company on our savings, and went home every Friday to that Thai restaurant on Ditmars and ordered the same thing he always ordered. What he underestimated was that discipline works both ways. He thought the care I had put into our life was just sentiment. It wasn't. It was a record. Every transfer, every authorization form, every account statement, all of it existed because I had been paying attention. The very habits he counted on to keep me in the dark were the same ones that eventually lit everything up. There's something worth sitting with in that. The things you build quietly, consistently, with no audience. They don't disappear just because someone tries to take advantage of them. They accumulate, and when it matters, they're still there. Conrad showing up the way he did, a stranger calling my work line, asking to meet, could have gone a dozen different ways. I could have said no. I almost did. What made me stay on the phone was something I still find hard to name. Not hope, exactly. More like a recognition that the person on the other end of the line was working with the same incomplete map I was, and that two incomplete maps are sometimes better than one. That's its own kind of intelligence, knowing when to let someone else's information into your picture, even when trust is the last thing that feels safe. I'm not going to pretend the whole experience made me wise in some clean, finished way. It made me tired first. Then careful. Then eventually clearer about what I actually value versus what I was holding onto out of habit. There's a difference between loving a life and being attached to the version of it you expect it to have. Learning that difference cost me something real, but it also gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. The ability to trust my own judgment again, on my own terms. What I know now is that integrity has a kind of structural memory. When you have been honest with your money, with your choices, with the way you showed up inside your own life, that record doesn't vanish. It stays in the paperwork. It stays in the way people around you speak about you when things get serious. Brandon thought he was erasing himself from a situation. What he was actually doing was writing his own account of who he was. So was I. We just wrote very different things. Elise got her money back. Not all of it, but enough. And more importantly, she got her name back. She got her own account, in her own name, in a borough she chose for herself. That's not a small thing. That's actually everything.